Hello and welcome to a very special Get Kafkanated here in the Ivan London office where it all started. I'm joined today not by Krabby, but by Stanislav of Kafka Guy and 2-Minute Streaming fame. And today for a conversation all about the costs of Kafka. We are very lucky to be in person together this week ahead of Current tomorrow and the day after, and our Night Before Current event this evening where Stan's going to be speaking. So look forward to that if you're in town. But yeah, thank you for coming on the show today, Stan.
Thank you for the invite to the office. Great place. We have crabs, some seafood too.
Yes,
everything's great.
And coffee. And yeah, if you're thinking that the background looks familiar, it's because it's where we filmed all of the bumpers for the show. So there you go. You're a little bit behind the curtain there. So, without further ado, I'm going to dig into some of our questions. So, in terms of like your history with Kafka, you've been doing this a little while, right? So you've been a Confluent, you've been a committer to the project.
Yeah.
You're consulting independently now, and obviously you're writing for 2-Minute Streaming, and you're making content for LinkedIn, videos and stuff. At what point in that journey did cost become something that you were thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to. Without going too deep into a journey of why I started consulting at all, but at the time when I left Confluent, I thought I was going to get out of the Kafka space for a little bit, okay? And I kind of did that successfully for a month or two. I was like, okay, hey, let me play with Claude, let me play with these things, see what I want to build.
Yeah.
And then Wolfsteam got acquired. And I could not believe that. That like completely shocked me. And that got me back into the space, actually. Some people messaged me and I started actually digging into everything. I think that's what got me into Kafka costs. Like, because before being an engineer in Confluent, it's like, yeah, internally people would say, oh, we're expensive. Oh, some customers don't like us because we're expensive. But you never see the numbers. I don't know what numbers we're talking about. So I just thought, okay, maybe we're a little expensive, whatever. We have a good service. We have a lot of engineers. We work on a lot of stuff. But after you saw, I don't know if the audience has seen, but Wolfsteam's marketing was all about being cheaper than Kafka. So it was always like 10x cheaper Kafka, literally. 90%, cut your costs by 90%, literally. And then they give you a calculator which has you calculate how much you're saving from using Wolfsteam, right? And after the acquisition, the prices doubled twice too. So then the calculator also stayed at like 10x cheaper. But I think that's what got me into Kafka cost. So then I was like, okay, first of all, how can you double the price and you're still the same 19% cheaper or 80% cheaper? That's bullshit. So I started diving into that. And yeah, I think that's what got me into actually like digging deeply into, okay, where do the Kafka costs come from? Why is it so expensive? Like I understood at a high level why the architecture helped with the cost and stuff, but I think until you run the numbers, you never understand like, and you see like, oh my God, 80% of my costs are from networking at retail prices. That's ridiculous. So I think that's what got me into it. I think the acquisition.
When it comes to actually like running those numbers, so like, yeah, I can very much see how going from being like, oh, I work at a vendor to like, oh, I'm on the outside looking in, and you're like, wait a minute on these numbers. Like, but when it actually comes to running those numbers, especially for people who like, when I've been a platform engineer and I've been managing Kafka, cost wasn't really something I thought about too much.
Yeah.
Like, why is pricing hard to think about and to come up with numbers as opposed to just being like, oh, like the math is annoying?
Because it's a distributed system. And distributed systems are super complex. They have thousands of configs. They have different types of deployment types. Then they have like settings. So like, is your replication factor 2, 3, or 5? Are you deploying in a data center you own, or are you using AWS, or are you using some other vendor? You get so many assumptions everywhere, which really makes you want to do everything custom. Or like, are you using tiered storage? Are you using fetch from follower or not? Are you in Azure where AZ costs are free, or are you in AWS where they charge you the most in the world for these things? And then other assumptions like, okay, are you using, let's say you're using disk. Is your disk 50%? Are you trying to keep it 50% full, 60% full, 70% full? What's the number you choose? And I think that's why it's so complicated. And that's why everybody started doing calculators. If you notice, like when Wolfsteam launched a calculator, and around I think the time they got acquired, everybody shipped a calculator. Literally every company. Like Confluent had a calculator, Steam Native had a calculator, Ivan got a calculator too. AutoMQ got a calculator. Everyone you can think of really has a calculator that shows you why your Kafka costs are cheaper. And not all of them are open source. So you can't even figure out what they're doing. The thing that Warp Steam did, though, and when I called them out, was that they did the mistake of open sourcing their calculator because it was on the front end. So it was JavaScript on the page.
Oh,
and that's
okay.
how I actually,
and
that's how I found a blatant bug in the calculator where they had, if I remember correctly, I think they were counting replication factor, the replication costs as, because usually, like if you produce 1 gigabyte to Kafka, you would pay 2 gigabytes of inter-AZ transferring, because when it comes to the leader broker, the broker will send it to one other broker and one other, so 1 gigabyte you're sending twice.
Yep.
They had a 2.5 multiplier on that, which actually increased the cost quite a lot. It was some blatant bug. But what I also did, and this is funny, I don't know if you want to get into too much of that calculator saga, because that was a big saga.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I don't know if you have a question like that.
I was literally about, my next question was going to be like, so calculators. So yeah, no, by all means.
Okay, no, I have a lot to talk about that. So I had this big article called the Brutal Truth About Kafka Costs Calculations, or something like that.
Yes.
And I really just completely broke down all the lies that WarpStream did, that said about Kafka costs. And I called them out specifically because they were the most blatant liars in the market. Like every vendor, does bench marketing or some sort of cost marketing where they don't say a complete truth or something, or if they do say the truth, they pick a scenario where they end up favorable, right? That's every vendor in the world does that, literally no exceptions.
Apart from Ivan.
Apart from Ivan, yeah, potentially. But they lied blatantly. We had tweets from Richie where he would say, and these tweets would get popular, like they would say something like, our calculator makes a lot of assumptions in Kafka's favor, like using the cheapest disks. That's what he said on Twitter, dude. He said that. Blatant lie. Because first, you don't use the cheapest disks, they used SSDs. The prices are the same. Then their SSDs, the GP3, the newer generations, are 8 cents a gigabyte. The GP2s are 10 cents a gigabyte. They said in the FAQ of the calculator they're using GP3s, but the calculator had 10 cents a gigabyte. So it was pricing you for GP2. And the code would say, literally a comment above the code, about the 10 cents a gigabyte, say, use GP2 pricing because it's simpler. Because they had some branching logic that would compare MSK costs, which use GP2. So some absurd stuff like that. And then, of course, he says that that's the assumption in Kafka's favor, but it's not, because first you're using the expensive SSDs, not even the 2 cents cheaper ones. Then SSDs are not the cheapest storage there is. There are HDDs that were 0.045 or something, like twice less at least, something like that. Then they had the replication bug. And then there were other stupid things in that calculator, which was obviously not in Kafka's favor, because, for example, I don't think at some point it didn't support tiered storage, or it defaulted to without tiered storage. It's 2 years now, so I don't remember the exact specifics. You can look up the article. It's a great article. It got me in a lot of trouble. That article got me in a lot of trouble. But I'm happy. I'm happy about it because people should know. I actually got a phone call from the CEO from that article. Can you believe that? I got a phone call. There was even like an internal Slack thread about me. People were talking about me. There were like some even almost a veiled threat in Slack saying,
Cool. We're back. We're not entirely sure what happened, but we're back. Camera's doing camera things. So we were talking about cost calculators.
No, I remember what I was talking about, but we live?
Yes.
Everything good?
Yes, we're live.
Okay. No, I'll continue my thoughts. So I got a phone call from the CEO.
Yes.
Talking about because my article also had, I need to tell a full story here. I'm getting on a tangent, but I have to tell a full story to be transparent. The thing with that that workstream acquisition in general, it was contested in a dramatic thing because you have to remember for a full year, Confluent was tracking everything these guys did.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were trying to catch everything they were shipping. We had a team that was working on Confluent Freight, working at their own pace. Outside of our company, they weren't meeting with PMs. Dude, that was like throw everything at the problem. And, there was so much effort being thrown into that project, and it felt like it was going very well because that's what the internal communications were. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, you pay $220 million for a year-old startup. In what world is that okay? How do you feel if you're the leader of that team, which you worked super hard for a year and something under complete stress, working probably 12 or more hours every day, to just get that a competitor acquired? Like, wow. So I said something like that in my article.
Yes, yeah.
I said something like that. And I think from the CEO's position, it was like, okay, well, what does that mean for the company? You don't want to read stuff like that because it will cause internal division. So they reached out to me and they said that I was providing my opinion, but I kind of stated as a fact, or it sounded like I have some internal information on the matter, which I really don't. I just saw it from the outside. So I deleted it at the end. But why am I saying this now again? Is that it got me in trouble because after that I saw in Slack, I have friends in the company, right? So they would tell me what they're talking about me, and they would say something like, "It's really almost mischievous." I think the word was when somebody works at a company, gains experience here, and then goes and talks against the company, and they would say, "Fortunately," or something like that. Tech is a small circle, and karma has its way of finding.
Oh my God!
Its way.
Wow.
What the hell? You're lucky I don't go more into this topic. So what was I trying to say? So it got me in trouble. And I think ever after that, Confluent people, a lot of people at Confluent kind of look at me with some negativity as if I hate the company or something. But first, I was talking against WarpStream, not Confluent. Okay? The WarpStream had joined a month earlier or something. Yeah. Secondly, I'm still pretty objective in everything I say. And I'm not really trying to pick a fight, or I'm not trying to. So even though I'm talking about WarpStream here, I'm not trying to pick a fight with them. I think they have a good product.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think they're shipping well. I think they changed the space, and they had a great exit. But they still lied in the marketing. So I'm going to say it. You have to be frank. I mean, come on, let's improve the industry. Let's talk about these things frankly and improve the industry by actually competing on what's actually real and not on lies. So... it got me into trouble, and that's what got me into Kafka. Kafka costs.
It dragged you back into Kafka costs. You were
man,
there's a story here.
There's nothing like some drama.
Well, that answers my next question, which would be how do vendors occasionally weaponize cost calculators? And I think it's very much a good example there. You mentioned that obviously there's this distinction between open source and closed source cost calculators. Are there any open source calculators maintained by the community or by vendors that you would trust? Or is it the case that every time you've seen the code, there are always assumptions made that are fudging the numbers?
I'm not aware of any open source ones. Even WarpStream's one is not open source. I downloaded it off their website.
Of course, yeah.
So I'm not sure. No, I mean, I have my own calculator, which I shipped as a product you can use. And trust me, because I'm trustable. Famous last words, right?
I mean, you don't work for a vendor, which helps, right?
Yeah, but you've
got no skin in the game.
Whatever. But no, I plan on open sourcing it, and I've planned on open sourcing it for a year, and I did not keep it proprietary for a reason. I just didn't have the bandwidth to polish it up because it's actually it's well written code. I write very beautiful code, mind you. And I take care into the code I wrote, and I did not use AI for it. Very important. I did not use any AI for it. This was pre-Claude code, and I wouldn't have wanted to either. I plan on open sourcing that, so hopefully we will have that at some point in the near future. It's just if I get my priorities straight.
I imagine there's a part of your brain, having been an outspoken critic of other cost calculators are out there. Look, you're worried that people will.
No, it's fine. No, that's not true. I'm happy with people criticizing me. Dude, I'm on social media. You know how much hate I get? I get the dumbest comments. Sometimes I say the dumbest things. I get a lot of hate. I'm happy with it. It helps me improve, and that's important.
Good stuff. Well, I look forward to it. It's gonna
be good. And please, if anybody wants to review it, please criticize the calculator how you want when I release it.
One one thing I think that's particularly relevant to conversations about cost calculators for products like Warp Stream or Diskless or like Freight is like compression, right? Like compression is a really complicating factor. Where does that fit in this kind of story about cost? And is it easy to factor that in, or is it difficult to mitigate factor?
Right, it's kind of difficult because well, it depends if you're using compression or not. I think there's a fair amount of Kafka deployments that don't even use compression, which is a big shame because it can really help drive your costs down. It helps drive the costs down in two ways. First, obviously, there's less traffic going through, so you get billed less by, let's say, AWS. But then also on the storage front, you have less to store. And remember, Kafka replicates 3 times. So if you have 10 gigabytes, you're storing 30. If you compress that 10 gigabytes to 1, you're going to store 3 gigabytes. 30 to 3 is a 27 gigabyte difference. That's a huge difference. So that matters a lot. I think also people should spend time into playing with the compression levels. There was a KIP that introduced compression levels. I think a lot of people use the defaults. And I think again with the Warp Stream saga, because compression again played a role in Warp Stream. And that's because they charge, I think they're the only vendor that charges on uncompressed writes, which means, let's say I have 10 gigabytes of data, raw data, but my producer compresses it to 1. And I send it to Warp Stream. Warp Stream charges me on 10 gigabytes, all right? This still ends up being somewhat cheap because their prices are not very high. But it really complicates the cost comparison. To your earlier question, that complicates the cost comparison again because it's so complicated to think of. Even when I was writing my article, and trust me, I spent a lot of time on that article and on calculator code and everything. Every few minutes or every few hours when I was revisiting a paragraph, I would get confused by a number. So I'm like, oh, wait, this is uncompressed and this is compressed. Because the comparison would be, if you're comparing to Warp Stream, well, let's run to it because, again, I'm getting confused live now. But like if they're comparing to a Kafka, okay? And they say, okay, let's compare, for simplicity, we'll use simple numbers. Let's say compare 1 gigabyte a second. Their calculator would have 1 gigabyte uncompressed. So when you slide the slider on the calculator, you say 1 gigabyte a second, it's 1 gigabyte uncompressed, okay? And then what they do is they use the compression ratio, which they had hard-coded to 5, or no, sorry, to 4, to a smaller one. It was hard-coded to 5 back in the day, then they changed it to 4. This was part of the shenanigans they did to keep the 80% cheaper. Okay, so post-acquisition, I think it moved from 4 to 5, something like that.
Yep.
And before that, they actually had a compression slider that let you go up to all the way to 10. So they removed that because I think they realized you can get that good of a saving if you use compression rate of 10, which remind me to talk about that too. But let's say compression rate is 5, simplicity again. So 1 gigabyte a second compression rate is 5, right? So that means the producer writing 1 gigabyte would get divided by 5, would get 200 megabytes a second, right? So Warp Stream charges you at 1 gigabyte a second. And the Kafka you're comparing to, which is self-hosted Kafka, that Kafka would pay AWS costs equivalent to storing 200 megabytes for 7 days times 3 and 200 megabytes in the networking. Now, this is where the compression ratio is so important because the difference between a 5 and 10 compression ratio, if you go to 10, you would get 1 gigabyte would be 100 megabytes, right? So you're getting twice less the cost in networking. You divide it by half. And then the storage would also get twice less, so you're storing twice less. But most importantly, because they were not using tiered storage, all right, when you, and the brokers were bottlenecked on storage, they would deploy the calculator in real-life deployments without tiered storage in production. If storing a lot of data for 7 days, would deploy extra EC2 nodes just so they can have an extra EBS connected to the EC2. So you're deploying unnecessary compute just so you can have an EBS because you're not using just a bunch of disks either, JBot. So the calculator would have cases where it would go up to 276 Kafka nodes to store the data, okay? And you imagine if you get the compression ratio to something else, then that 270, which is a ridiculous number to begin with because you use tiered storage, would probably be 130. And then the cost calculation changes completely. So you have 3 ways from which it changes. And then, more importantly, compression ratios are important to talk about. Hugh, let me ask you a question. What do you think the diskless type of workloads are best suited for? What type of data would you dump in your diskless Kafka?
Okay, so you've got high volume data, and you can tolerate increased latency. So like logging right? Sensor data that you don't need sub-seconds.
Metrics.
Yeah, metrics.
Metrics logging, okay. do you know one thing about such workloads? They compress extremely well. A log compresses, like logs have all these JSON fields, etc., depending on what format you use, but they compress extremely well. So a 5x compression ratio is actually a little low for that. I think you can get 10. There was this blog post by Red Panda, or not by Red Panda, but by Tristan from Red Panda, who attack WarpStream even more. And he did some example where he downloaded some logs from some open source data set, some Hive logs or something like that, okay? And he showed that you get 10x compression on these. And even with the producer, because the producer sends batches of records, right? You can configure the batch size. And the way the compression works, you apply compression on that single batch. So it's not like you're compressing 100 megabytes at once, you're compressing a few kilobytes.
Yeah.
But usually when you send high volume of data to Kafka, it's recommended you send a bigger batch size.
Yes, yeah.
But even then, Tristan proved that 32 kilobytes only, that's a small batch size, compresses 10x. If you go to 128 kilobytes per compresses even more. There are blog posts of Uber achieving 170x compression, okay? So some things are very compressible.
Do you have to have a much larger batch size to reach those kind of rates of compression?
170.
Yeah.
170 uses some proprietary or some new compression algorithm, so you probably can't even get it with the vanilla Kafka client.
Got it.
But you can definitely get 10x. I think 10x is realistic, and 10x changes the cost completely. So that's another reason why it's so hard to calculate the costs accurately. And it varies, right? Like the calculator can say, or WarpStream can say, well, yeah, but the workloads we deploy compress only 5x, which could be true. I think it's more like 8x probably, but you're getting into the weeds. But that's another reason why it's so difficult. It's so difficult.
So like there are, there's so much information out there about pricing. We've spoken about like just how confusing some of these claims are from different companies and different vendors about pricing, right? So, obviously with Confluent, like storage is advertised at like 8 cents a gigabyte, but then post replication, it's actually more like, 24. Freight is 90% savings. WarpStream's 90% savings. Obviously, Ivan, we've got, we're not quite 90%, but we're scrappy with 80% on diskless, and we benchmark that. I've seen some of those numbers. With things being 80% cheaper under the right circumstances. If I'm someone in 2026 sitting down to buy some unit of Kafka, like, how do I make sense of that? Like, obviously, cost calculators have their problems that we've discussed. Are there any like key metrics or figures that I can start with to help make some like good faith comparisons between those claims?
I think it's really difficult. Because you just mentioned something. So Confluent has this hidden cost of the replication.
Yep.
So as you said, it says 8 cents on the website. I think they added a tooltip last year or some point, but for many years there was no tooltip. It was buried in the docs, and it's 8 cents a gigabyte pre-replication. Confluent Cloud is configured to RF equals 3, and you cannot change that. So you're always paying 24 cents a gigabyte in that case. So that's a hidden cost nobody takes into account. There are other hidden costs that it's not like the vendor hit, but like I'm gonna upload a video on this. But it talks about let's say I'm buying Confluent, just an example, some SaaS. I have my clients in my own AWS account, and I'm sending the data to Confluent's AWS account. If we're using public networking, which is the default, I'm paying 1 cent for every gigabyte I send out, and I'm paying 1 cent for every gigabyte I come in. I'm paying that cent to AWS, not to Confluent. So most people don't even know that's part of the bill they're paying, right? Like it's not clear, because first you don't get in the Confluent bill, so you don't even know. It's just somewhere in AWS. And have you seen an AWS bill? It's this big, and it just says like networking in this region.
Yep.
And that's it. So you have no idea where it's coming from. So that's something that people don't take into account too. So that's another difficulty. I think you really have to hire some sort of expert like me. I really think you just have to hire me, because I haven't seen anyone else talk about these things in such depth. Really, if there are other people that talk about these things, I think they work at a company. They try to say something. But because there was another funny thing. So Red Panda once published this PDF file that's like a comparison to Confluent Cloud costs to show how cheaper they are. Okay, they hired this consulting group called McKnight, and the McKnight guys completely got things wrong. They got something like the Confluent Cloud costs. I think they called it $46K a month or something like that, but the actual cost was $75K a month. because they missed the storage hidden print. So they missed the 3x of storage. And then they missed the fact that you have to pay for your, what's it called? For the cross-AZ, not cross-AZ, for the public networking. Or for the fact that, like, I'm using a public IP to send my data to another cloud account, and that's another VPC. Whereas if you're using Red Panda per se, let's say BOYC, you can probably VPC peer it and get it for free. Stuff like that. So they miss some things like this. So I don't even know. I don't even think people have a really good way of getting the cost right. I really don't believe it. And I'm not sure how many people even care too much about it, because once a decision is made, it's kind of like, if I'm a decision maker and I buy Confluent, they come up more expensive later. It's not like my CFO is going to come and say, oh my God, you said this was 46K, but it came out to 60. So I'm not even sure people really get into trouble for it. So I guess they don't care as much.
And I think that's something that I've seen when I was consulting in the Kafka space of like, you are, as an engineer, you're assessed on the reliability of the system you're building, right? Like, you don't get any kickback if you make the cost 50% cheaper, but if it breaks during a critical period, it's your ass. So like, that is something I've always found very interesting, is particularly with Kafka. How much would you say that like the fine-tuning decisions are responsible for cost? Like, obviously we're talking about compression and replication. Like, how much does changing those numbers pushing your cost up massively. And down?
No, massively. I think that's also a big difference between BOYC, license-based BOYC, and SaaS. And these deployment models matter a lot. And up to 2024, before WarpSim got acquired, Confluent would shit on BOYC. Okay, internally we would shit on BOYC, and externally we would still talk negatively on BOYC. It's really funny, by the way. I saw, Jack Van Lighty. He posts really good stuff. Really smart guy. He had a post about like why BOYC is not the future of the cloud. Basically, why it sucks. Okay, very long article. And after WarpSim got acquired, he put out a new article that said things in more detail. And I think the gist of it, and I might get him wrong because it's a very long article, but I think before he was saying that the BOYC model sucks because there are trade-offs, right? Like, you don't have good debuggability, you don't have full management, you have ownership splitting between the customer and you, so who owns what, and if something breaks, who's at fault. And then later he said, actually, BOYC can be good. It's still not the future of the cloud, but it can be part of a full package, which was, of course, the Confluent messaging, because that's why they bought WarpSim. But actually, I have kind of a different opinion. And also, I even saw Web Archive. I'm really like a detective with these things. I saw him edit the article too, to make it a little bit clearer that he was talking in this original article, he was talking about single tenant BOYC, which, as far as I understand, is more like what you guys and Red Panda do. Whereas WarpSim's BOYC is, their control plane is BOYC, but that's actually some multi-tenant thing hosted in their own, sorry, the opposite. The agents are BOYC, but the control plane is multi-tenant hosted in the cloud. So anyway, it's funny to see how like the opinions of BOYC change. Again, sorry for the rant. But the good thing with BOYC, when you own your own data layer, is you're on the hook for these things. So you are actually free to get first you can play around with the instance types. Maybe you want to try Graviton. Maybe you want to try a new instance type that gives you more CPU, etc. These things are real improvements that can lower your costs or increase your performance, or sometimes both, which is crazy good, right? Then you can play around with, okay, maybe I don't want to store too much data locally. I want to tier more to tiered storage earlier, or for some topics, etc. Whereas I think for most SaaS, a lot of SaaS vendors don't even give you a difference. Like, this is the crazy thing with Confluent, if I'm not mistaken, it's 8 cents a gigabyte times 3, even for the data that's in tiered storage. And they use tiered storage because they developed tiered storage first in the industry. And they still charge you as if it's replicated 3x, but it's not. It's in AWS. So I'm paying a 10x markup. I think net, the whole markup of Confluent in particular is 7x. The infra. And those are not my numbers, because I haven't actually run the numbers, but Tristan from Red Panda, again, he had very good articles on the matter. Like, it's a shame those articles did not get more eyeballs, because I really enjoyed, like, as someone who talks about cost, I really enjoyed reading them. And
we had a great conversation on the show last year, Tristan and I. He was a super interesting guy.
Yeah, and but to your question then, so BOYC gives you more control, and I think the industry, we had some hate about it, but those are good things. It's good to be in control. And I'm more of a fan of the non-managed offerings than the managed offerings because in general, I have this opinion that the whole data infra industry, not just tech, not just Kafka, sorry, has moved towards like, oh, I'm too scared to run this. Oh, it's too difficult to run, especially now with AI, you have no excuse. You can learn any topic in a week to a very good extent. And Kafka has so much documentation online that AI knows what it's talking about. I've never seen it make a very bad mistake, unless you're using some super small model, but don't use the most expensive one. So I like models where you can, I like the expertise of managing your own thing. I don't think it's that hard. And people say Kafka is so hard to manage. No, it's not. No, it is not. It works spectacularly well. It's disgustingly reliable. And people love it because it's so reliable. It's a distributed system. So I like BOYC from that point of view. I think I forgot the original question you asked me.
No. So you're definitely covering that point of like how much of cost comes from that fine tuning, right? And it's like
a lot.
If you're self-managing or you're on BYOC, there's a lot of opportunities.
And the discounts, man. We're not talking about discounts. There's cloud discounts too. These are under NDA, so there are no public numbers in the matter. I could never find any public numbers. But I know of places where AWS has done like a 90% discount on networking for big customers, okay? That's or crazy. Maybe you get something else, 80, 70%. That depends on how much you use with AWS and how you negotiate your contract with them. Obviously, when you buy from a SaaS, you lose that. You lock in whatever price the SaaS gives you, which the SaaS might give you a price. But if you're spending 1 million with that SaaS, why would they give you a 70% discount? But if you're spending 1 million with that SaaS and you're spending 30 million with AWS, moving that million to AWS, you probably might get some sort of discount because you have a 30 million contract, you have way more negotiating leverage. So, yeah, that's a good thing about BOYC, I guess.
Do you see a world in which more people adopting BYOC as a model, particularly for like larger customers, drives a changing incentive model? Because obviously right now, like if I'm a vendor, you know, like the inefficiency is revenue, right? Like overcharging for certain things or charging for certain things is like how I make my money. If people are on BYOC and more of my customers are on BYOC, I have like more of an incentive to make my hosted and my fully managed services competitive on price, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Again, this came from Red Panda. I guess these guys talk a lot about cost and have some good points, but one early article from Alex, the founder of Red Panda, talked about how SaaS has a bit of a skewed incentive and how they're a revenue inflating business model because let's say I'm selling AWS infrastructure and I buy 100K worth of EC2 and I sell it to you for 200K, all right? I'm going to book a revenue of 200K. But 100K of that is just pure reselling. Like it's pure recycling money, right? Like I'm not actually selling you anything new. You can buy it from AWS too.
Yep.
An investor, and that boosts your revenue growth and your absolute revenue numbers, which is really good for investors in public markets. And I think that's why companies sort of prefer that model too. And not only companies, but look, the key thing is that the business is inseparable from the tech. So if you create a startup and your VC says, hey, I want you to have a managed service, he doesn't even tell you why, maybe. You're going to do a managed service most of the time because you're beholden by the VC has you with the leash, right? Like you're a dog and the VC has you by the leash, depending on how much you dilute it. But you're going to do that. And so I'm trying to say that like financial incentives coming from investors or coming from VCs who try to fool investors just so they can get a better exit shapes the technology we use. And that shapes the narratives we read. And that's why you read so many good news and good stuff about SaaS. Why managed is so good? Because there are benefits, let's be frank. There are benefits, right? But you get a skewed picture. A skewed picture because you see just the benefits, not the drawbacks. And for BOYC, nobody really talks so much. So that article by Alex, again, opened my eyes on how reselling infra inflates the revenue. And even though Red Panda had some small amount of revenue, you know, when Snowflake wanted to buy them, some rumor on the revenue numbers leaked. I really forgot the number. I don't want to get it wrong on camera, but it was small. And then I was thinking, okay, but because they only sell BOYC licenses, that's 100% profit, you know. So that's something to be accounted for. And if their business was on SaaS, maybe that would have been a 2-3x the revenue. But you don't account for it. People just talk about the absolute number and they see the small number they're saying, so, oh my God, so sad. But actually, profit-wise, it's probably fine. So yeah, those are some of the things about license-based costs. And then, yeah, you're right in that you're aligned with your customer in that You just want to keep them as a customer.
Yes.
They're going to pay the license fee anyway. So you're incentivized to lower the AWS spend because any dollar they spend on AWS is not a dollar they're spending with you. Whereas with SaaS, it's the opposite. If they spend on AWS, they're spending it with you and inflating your own numbers. So yeah, these incentives are important. I really haven't seen anyone talk about it besides Alex once in one blog post. Yeah.
I know this is definitely something we think about in terms of like how you price managed versus BYOC. One area I'd be interested to get into with you, and I know this is something you've written about before, obviously when you're managing your own Kafka or with BYOC, you've got that greater flexibility. For things like rack-aware partitioning and stuff like that, like what cost savings are out there for people who are willing to try out some of the newer stuff that's coming to Kafka?
Like Discuss?
Discuss for sure, but I'm thinking more like things like rack-aware and getting deeper into like multiple layers of tiering and stuff, like with these slightly more complex deployments. What savings are out there for those who are willing to look?
No, they're huge. They're huge. I think it depends if you are storage bound or networking bound, or like do you use a lot of do you have a lot of throughput but low retention, or do you just have a lot of retention, a lot of data, but your throughput is relatively low? In my calculator, I have two checkboxes. It's like enable tier storage, enable fetch from follower. And I've intentionally left them there. They update the price so that you can see the differences. You can really quickly eyeball with 3 clicks. You can figure out sort of the delta between each. And they're big. Sometimes I think up to 50% of the cost, especially the fetch from follower one, which eliminates the cross-zone networking costs of your consumers in Kafka. Because remember, Kafka is a technology. It was created with the idea of fan out. The whole idea is you put 1 gigabyte data of Kafka and you have at least 3 people, 3 different organizations, teams, or apps read it. So you have a fan out of at least 3x for you to consider Kafka. LinkedIn had an average fan out of 5.4. So every gigabyte was being written 5.4 times. In AWS terms, that means you're paying for most of the networking costs of those. You pay 2/3 of 5.4 because that's how the maths out. But you enable fetch from follower, that goes down to 0, assuming you have VPC peering and you're using the private IP. But that's a huge cost saving. It's huge. And then you have Discuss too, which is going to drive the price down, like down to here on the floor, which is a separate topic, but that hasn't shipped yet. So unless we talk about Inclus.
I mean, so we can talk about Inclus, right? So obviously, Ivan, we have our managed implementation of Discuss. Then you have the fork of Kafka where we're implementing this with our implementation that you can go and run, you can do it self-managed. I think the important distinction here is like, whilst KIP 1150 for Discuss topics has been accepted, there's still work to do around things like
just shipping
coordination. Shipping. There's some nuance there left in terms of like how you do things like batching and moving metadata. You have the batch coordinator. You have these new components that we're introducing into the Kafka ecosystem. In terms of Discuss implementations, obviously, we're very proud of our one at Ivan. But are there any particular implementations of that Discuss Kafka model that you think are like interesting or promising?
I think they're all interesting in their own way. I really respect you guys and I love you guys for pushing it to the open source, because if you hadn't done it, nobody would have done it. We would have never seen this in Kafka. So I love that. I think using Postgres is also cool. The fact that Inclus use Postgres. I'm not sure how long term you plan to use this.
It's definitely not the final version of the kit for sure, but it's super cool. Like we're Postgres experts here.
But Postgres is awesome. Postgres is great. It probably works. It probably works for quite enough. Then we had I think the Warpstream model is cool too. I think their tech is really cool. So that's great too. We had Ursa from Stream Native released. I like theirs too. Theirs is like very similar to a Discuss Kafka, but the difference they had, which was the Iceberg topics, or the fact that they store natively in Iceberg. That's something I really love too. I had a newsletter a week or two ago about this topic exactly. And I think that's the future of Kafka. It's not about costs, but it is to cost to a certain extent, because if you store your Kafka data in Iceberg with 0 copy, then you're not paying for 2x the storage to move it with a connector outside of Kafka. Then you have 2 copies of the data. So that's a good thing. I think that's the future for a separate reason and separate topics. So that's something I like. You guys also shipped Iceberg topics. I'm not sure how mature those are or how much you maintain them, but you had like a big announcement a year ago, which got very popular actually. People loved it.
It's super exciting. So we actually had Anatoly, my colleague from Ivan, who like developed our like open source Iceberg topics implementation on the show in the last episode. It's super interesting, but he really got into like why it's so hard to do, right?
Yeah.
The main thing being obviously you're adding work to your brokers in terms of doing the Avro to Parquet conversion.
That's a big problem. That could be a big problem.
And the thing that I hadn't realized at all until that conversation is that Avro and Parquet are not interchangeable in terms of data format. So you have, certain types and, types of data that you can put in that are completely disparate.
Yeah.
So those conversions are really awkward, and you have to do a lot of hard work to make sure that you can convert to Parquet from Avro and then back to Avro if you want to do consume from Iceberg. So it's
because you store some metadata if you lose some sort of info, right? So the fact that we have the Parquet back to Avro is what complicates the design, I would assume. Makes sense. That's problematic, yeah. So Buff Steam solved it, right?
Yes.
So they should be. Yes. Ursa also solved it or is solving it, so they should be. So it's doable, but it's difficult. I think the biggest drawback of your Iceberg topics is precisely because you guys you're working within this constraint of we have to have it be open source. I want an open source user to snap their fingers and enable this, right? Then you have to do it in the broker because you can't deploy a new component unless you completely change the architecture, in which case it's not.
And this is what we saw with the story with diskless topics, right? You have 3 competing kits for a period of time. You have Slack, AutoMQ, and Ivan all have different ideas. We basically ended up unifying our kit with Slack, which is super cool.
That was great. Great job, guys.
Super exciting.
I'm surprised you did that. That was a huge thing.
It's been such like a gift for someone who writes about Kafka as a story, because you're like, oh, look at us, we're like collaborating. AutoMQ's implementation for like pluggable storage backends is awesome, but I don't think necessarily there was the momentum there. I do wonder if we're going to end up with a similar situation with Iceberg topics, where you have all these implementations out there. It's just then a case of like how you then introduce that into Apache Kafka without reinventing the wheel too much, right?
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. But yeah, very excited to see where that goes. And yeah, you've got lots of cool people in the space, like stream-based as well, where you have this like hot and cold model for stream data, and then Fluss, rather than Pulsar. Fluss, where you have kind of the ultimate unification of Iceberg and Kafka, I guess, where the table becomes the primitive instead of the topic.
Yeah.
A lot of potential there for like.
That's another podcast we'll have to do.
Yes, yeah. Well, we had Janice on at the beginning of the year to talk about Fluss. So I feel like there are I get to have all these great conversations with people on the show. I kind of want to get everyone in a room again.
That would be a great idea.
Maybe just do another big panel at Christmas.
Like a season, like a season end.
No, we should do that again. It'd be awesome. But yeah, lots of cool people on the show. So one sort of final question for me, and then I don't think we have any audience questions, but if we do, if you're watching live, do check your questions in the chat on LinkedIn. What's the most underrated thing in the streaming space right now? Like we've touched on some really exciting stuff around like Iceberg topics, around diskless, around like fetch and follower and like rack-aware, like all of this cool stuff that's going on in the open source space and vendors are building. Is there anything that you're particularly excited about right now as a watcher of streaming?
Yeah, many things, but not all of them are being built. I have a lot of things I'm excited about that are not being built. But from things being built, well, obviously diskless and Iceberg are still the main topics, and I think we as an industry have we want a new thing to focus on every year. But diskless takes 3 years to build properly. Yeah. Iceberg takes 3 years to integrate properly. With even Iceberg is changing all the time, so. We have to be careful with this dopamine addiction. The last year's exciting things are still exciting, and they're gonna need to be exciting for 2-3 more years because that's when we're gonna get them fully. But things I like is proxies. I like proxies a lot.
Yeah,
I've been meaning to do a write-up on proxies because nobody talks about them. I feel like in the last year particularly, we had everybody kind of ship some sort of proxy or focus more on proxies. Now, of course, Conductor existed before that. Croxylicious existed before that. Confluent shipped a proxy. That was big news. Right? That was big news. I think that's something that we need to focus more on and see what we can do because they enable a lot of things. And then they let you divert traffic across clusters, which is very useful if you're willing to lose ordering. So something I'm also excited about is challenging the constraint space more in terms of, okay, we have X1, XOL. Why can't we have X at least Minayasar? I had Jason Taylor suggests that he worked at MSK before on the Kafka Community Spotlight. He said, that's a great idea. There was Donnie from Stripe, who also entertained the idea of, I hope I don't get this right, single AZ or replication, almost like I think you'd call it like, no, I think it was single AZ. So single AZ topics, which are still replicated 3 times just across different brokers in the same AZ. You're not getting the full availability of 3 AZs, but you still get high availability in that one node can die.
Almost like RAID for streaming. Right?
Yeah, exactly. RAID for streaming. That's probably a catchy name too. This is a great example because it lowers your cross AZ costs to 0. Yeah. Well, apart from the clients, that's a separate topic you have to solve because you probably need single zone clients for that too. But it gets the replication cost to 0 without being diskless. So it's still fast. That's a great thing. And I think it works for some people. For some sort of workloads, it probably works, not everyone.
If you have hot data that you're willing to tolerate some percentage risk of losing, then I think that could be really cool.
Yeah, and then there's also, Donnie had some really cool stuff on this. He had calculated the cost of downtime I think for his business particularly, but you can calculate the cost of downtime. Then you can calculate how many minutes of downtime you expect a year with a single zone failing, because you have 10 years of historical AWS data. Unless you're in US East 1, you're probably going to be up, right?
Yeah.
So you can check that and then compare that to the cost of actually paying the triple replication and triple AZ storage. The triple AZ replication only. And there may be cases where you're better off with the cost of losing access for a little bit. In fact, because it's really almost never do we get. I don't think we've ever had, even with the Middle East getting bombed by Iran. I don't think we lost the data. I think we lost availability, but I'm not sure if we had full data loss.
That I don't know. Certainly, that was an AZ that was gone for a good few weeks. But I don't know.
I don't think we had. I'm not sure.
I suppose it would depend on how you'd architected your data, but that's
like out of the region of the Middle East region, did they bomb all of the hard drives and did people lose data if they replicated, or was it just down after a while?
It was down. Yeah, it was just like a substation or something, wasn't it?
Even with hypersonic missiles falling, you probably still don't lose data. Okay, so barring a nuclear bomb or something like that, I think you probably won't lose the data. You'll just lose the availability, which means that later you can start up and you'll have data. And then also, in that event of downtime, what if you just route to a different region and create like a fallback topic?
As I say, it brings us back to proxies, right? Like that's a thing that you could failing over becomes much easier if you go to proxy rather than having to do everything.
And big companies like Stripe, OpenAI, New Relic, some others probably I'm missing. They have proxies. And some of them, like even OpenAI, they were the most vocal about their proxy. They chose to omit ordering. They omitted exactly once guarantees, just so they can have the benefits of changing clusters, routing, this sort of multi-tenancy or multi-cluster tenancy. So I think those problem spaces are not explored enough, and we're just having people explore them internally in their organizations, and maybe they talk in Kafka Summit, Confluent Current about it, or maybe not. So I think that's very exciting too.
I feel like there's a lot to be said there. There's been a lot of conversations in the past about like most people's use of Kafka in production is less than a megabyte a second. Right?
Yeah, you guys posted about that too.
Like, I wonder how many people actually need strict ordering of Kafka messages, or if that is sacrilege in and of itself, as something that obviously Kafka was built with that in mind.
Right.
But if you lose that, how free does your streaming infrastructure become for different design decisions?
And then do you even care about partitions? So you can have partitionless topics too, which is the biggest problem in Kafka. Right? I think I had someone from Conductor tell me, or they published in the community spotlight again, they did some analysis. They found like a lot of users of their customers, 75% of their bills came from partitioning, which was, I guess, the CPU cost of having so many partitions, just having to scale the brokers, which there's this big problem in Kafka, which can be solved, is that if you have a lot of partitions, there's a lot of replication overhead in every broker. For some reason, it uses CPU. And you can change that with various optimizations, like not pushing data for idle partitions, for example.
But
when you get to hundreds of thousands of partitions, or a lot, that drives up CPU costs, that drives up, like literally, I think in Confluent we would have, I'm kind of making up numbers, right? I don't remember the exact details, but let's say a few thousand partitions, cluster mostly idle, CPU at 60. Why? Why? Where is it coming from? It's not doing anything, right? So I think that's how I saw Kafka perform, at least back in the day. And if you don't, and the reason we have so many partitions, at least why conductors saw them, is the fact that people don't know how many partitions to create. And you cannot scale down the partitions. And scaling up breaks your ordering. So best default to a big number. And it's a tragedy of the commons, because I'm going to create my topic with 10 partitions. I don't care if I don't need them. But if everybody in the company thinks like this, suddenly you have 100K partitions and you're using 1K. Right? And that drives up costs.
I've worked at organizations, this is very early on in my career with Kafka, but where the default number of partitions per topic would be configured as 12 everywhere.
There we go.
You had like 1 or 2 services.
There we go, right? There we go, exactly. So if you can omit partitions, then you can even auto-scale partitions. So you can just have 1 or 2. You can auto-decide how many to have, and that's great. But you need to not want ordering. And there are also ways to solve this with ordering, especially at low scale. I think at high scale, it probably gets a little bit tricky to guarantee these things. And also probably devil in the details in terms of how often can you rescale partitions. But literally, records are just like you can have pointers. Just like this place does record batch pointers. Nothing stops you from having pointers to pointing at this. I think even Pulsar worked in some way like this, right? So for all the, like Pulsar may not be as used as Kafka, but they have a better architecture than Kafka, for sure. And we knew this even since 2018. So kudos to them. So there are ways. And then Northgard by LinkedIn also did something like similar. I still haven't really read about that system.
Northgard is one of these, like, I talked to a lot of people about streaming, and they're like, so Northgard's going to be a thing, eh? And I'm like, if you work for LinkedIn, probably.
Yeah, like, who cares? No, I don't really care too much. I mean, the ideas are not super novel, from what I remember, and it's proprietary.
So. If and when the rest of us are going to look at it, I'm sure it'll be interesting, but until that day.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's ways to do that too with referencing like records, especially at low scale. So I think partitions are a problem. So omitting ordering gets you no partitions potentially, so that's really cool.
I do love playing fantasy streaming architectures. You're like, oh, what if we did this? What if this component did this? And then like 5 years later, we've developed it, and we're like, maybe not. Maybe some of these things will be, the standard a few years from now.
But that's a good thing in the industry, and that's a good thing of companies like Buffstream, Warpstream, all the streams. They get to experiment, and if they work, eventually it's gonna come to Kafka. You don't want to experiment in the open source Kafka because you're gonna get a legacy mess. But I'm happy for some startup to create a legacy, then fail or get acquired for 200 million, and somebody else deal with that legacy, and I don't have to touch it. And then when we see what works, we adopt it in Kafka in a more controlled, more thoughtful way. Obviously, the drawback is we're 3, 4, 5 years late to it, but that's also what ensures the longevity. And also, you get extra features. The thing I love most about discuss topics in Kafka is the fact that it lets you have fast topics and slow topics in the same broker with the same metadata, even potentially letting you switch the topics. Now, obviously, again, more drawbacks. First, it's slower to do. Second, you don't get the full benefit of completely stateless Kafka because you are stateful auto. You could change that. You could have broker groups where 3 brokers are stateless. The other brokers only host classic topics within the same class. So that's still doable, but your current implementation, I think, doesn't really account for this yet, which is fine. You can do it in the future. But yeah, I think that sort of model of like somebody else innovates, proves that it works, and we try to adopt it. Basically, the breaking point here, or the limiting factor is, do we have somebody willing to contribute to Kafka? Do we have Ivan willing to do an open source feature? Do we have Confluent willing to do it? Like a lot of the times, at least the startup that did this would not want to. And there's also, again, the broken incentive of like selling open source infrastructure. It's just such a weird incentive business where the guy selling it, they don't want to make it cheaper. They don't want to make it faster to run. They don't want to make it easier to run. They don't want to introduce the features because they want their own proprietary thing. Because then, also because AWS, the big monster in the room, comes and they steal the Kafka because it's Apache, and then they sell it, and and they undercut you by 2-3x. And then before you know it, MSK has $1 billion of revenue, and the company that's employed 5,000 people to try to reach $1 billion in revenue barely has to get bought by IBM. End of story. The Kafka story. The Kafka show. But no, it's really difficult. It's just
I think it's a tough thing. I think there's a lot of conversation at the moment, and I think we probably don't have time to get into it too much. But of that, like weighing open source against profitability as a business, I think I'm glad to be at Ivan at a company where open source is something that's very important to us. But I think it's something that's becoming increasingly contentious as we see like consolidation in markets.
Yeah, like I'm sure there's a popular phrase to explain the situation, but it's always easy when the money is flowing. When you have excess resources, you usually get along. But it's when things get tight in real life too, or in tech, or everywhere. When things get tight is where you get more drama popping up, more problems between people and organizations. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with Kafka in this space. I'm not really sure. I don't have a strong opinion on what happens.
I think, whatever happens, I think we're looking at an interesting few years of innovation in the open source space on Kafka, and there's a lot.
Or contention too, or drama.
Yeah,
but I'll be here to cover it.
I was going to say, great for us as people who professional Kafka watchers. It keeps things interesting.
Yeah.
And on that note, thank you so much for your time today. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for the invitation.
I enjoyed this a lot. If people are interested in your work on keeping abreast of Kafka, like where can they find you on the internet?
My name, I think, is too hard to write. Stanislav Kozlovski. So just 2minutestreaming.com. You can probably find stuff there. Yeah.
Great stuff. So do check out Stan's work. He's doing lots of interesting stuff. If you're in London this evening, do come join us at the Night Before Current over near the Excel. Thank you to everyone who... I'm getting so thrown by this crab in the viewfinder. Thank you to everyone who joined us live for the show today. If you'd like to suggest a topic or you're interested in speaking, do reach out on LinkedIn. And yeah, carry on the conversation there. Thank you for listening. And now I'm going to awkwardly hit my end stream button.